The golden hues of Ouagadougou's first sunlight painted the presidential palace walls as the rumble of armored vehicles shattered the morning's calm. Like angry spirits, dust clouds rose from the red earth while American Humvees surrounded the compound in perfect military formation. Adjusting his tactical vest, Captain Rodriguez already had sweat beading on his forehead despite the early hour. Through his binoculars, he could see the Burkina Bay flag still flying proudly above the palace, its red, white, and green colors defiant against the pale sky. Helicopter rotors cut through the air like metal birds of prey circling their target. Local vendors setting up their morning stalls fled in terror, leaving behind scattered mangoes and colorful fabrics. For centuries, the ancient baobab tree had stood guard over this land, and now it seemed to lean protectively toward the palace. Inside, Ibrahim Traoré stood at his office window, his reflection ghost-like in the bulletproof glass. The young president's hands remained steady as he watched the foreign soldiers position themselves around his home with military precision. Aminata, his aide, burst through the mahogany doors, her traditional head wrap askew and her breathing labored from running up 3 flights of stairs. "Mr. President, they're demanding your immediate surrender," she whispered urgently, clutching a radio transmitter crackling with American voices. Traoré's jaw tightened as he recognized the arrogance in their tone, the same colonial attitude his ancestors had fought against for generations. The smell of traditional breakfast tea still lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the normal morning that had been violently interrupted. Behind him, portraits of Thomas Sankara and other African liberation heroes seemed to watch with expectant eyes. The loudspeaker on the lead vehicle crackled to life, its mechanical voice echoing off the palace walls like thunder. "President Traoré, you have 30 minutes to surrender yourself for immediate extradition to the United States." The announcement was delivered in broken French, adding insult to the injury of this blatant violation of sovereignty. Children from the nearby school had gathered at the palace gates, their curious faces pressed against the iron bars as they tried to understand why foreign soldiers surrounded their leader's home. Market women in bright boubous began arriving, their voices rising in traditional songs of resistance passed down through generations. The morning call to prayer from the nearby mosque mixed with the growing crowd's chants, creating a symphony of defiance. Even the street dogs seemed to sense the tension, barking at the unfamiliar uniforms and strange accents. Captain Rodriguez checked his watch and spoke into his headset, his voice carrying the weight of orders he privately questioned. The 30-minute deadline felt both eternal and impossibly short as hundreds of civilians began gathering outside the palace gates. Old men with walking sticks shuffled forward, their weathered faces bearing the scars of colonial oppression and post-independence struggles. Young mothers held their babies high as if presenting them to their president in a gesture of protection and solidarity. The captain had been briefed about potential resistance, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of an entire community willing to stand between his forces and their leader. Somewhere in the distance, drums began to beat in the ancient rhythm of war. Rodriguez realized this mission might not go according to plan. The sound of bare feet on hot asphalt grew louder as thousands of Burkina Bay citizens streamed toward the presidential palace from every direction. Mama Fatou, a weathered market vendor with silver-streaked hair, led a group of women carrying wooden spoons and metal pots as makeshift drums. Her voice cracked with emotion as she shouted traditional war chants that had once rallied warriors against French colonizers. Behind her, university students in torn jeans and faded t-shirts linked arms. Their young faces were set with a determination that reminded onlookers of the student uprisings of decades past. Motorcycle taxi drivers abandoned their bikes in the middle of dusty streets, joining the human river flowing toward their president's defense. The acrid smell of burning tires began to fill the air as improvised barricades sprouted across major intersections. Even the street children, usually invisible to the world, emerged from their hiding places to add their small voices to the growing chorus of resistance. Through his scope, Captain Rodriguez watched the crowd swell beyond his worst-case scenario projections, transforming from hundreds to thousands in mere minutes. His radio crackled with urgent updates from his perimeter teams, each reporting the same impossible situation: unarmed civilians creating human shields around every access point. A group of elderly women in colorful head wraps sat directly in front of his lead vehicle, their weathered hands clasped in prayer. Their eyes held no fear, only the quiet strength of mothers who had buried children to war and would not yield their remaining sons to foreign aggression. Behind them, teenagers with smartphones live-streamed every moment, turning this confrontation into a global spectacle his commanders had desperately wanted to avoid. The captain's training had prepared him for armed resistance, not for grandmothers singing lullabies while blocking his advance. His finger hesitated over the radio button as he realized that any attempt to move forward would require him to physically remove civilians who reminded him of his own abuela back in Texas. From his palace balcony, President Traoré witnessed the spontaneous uprising with a mixture of pride and concern that tightened his chest. Workers from the nearby textile factory had formed a protective semicircle around the palace gates, their colorful uniforms creating a living rainbow against the military green of the American vehicles. School teachers stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers still carrying hoes from their morning fieldwork, united in their refusal to let foreign boots desecrate their sovereign soil. The sight of his people risking everything for their leader brought tears to Traoré's eyes, but also a crushing weight of responsibility. He knew that one wrong move, one moment of panic from either side, could turn this peaceful resistance into a massacre. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like protective arms around the gathered crowd. In the distance, he could see more people arriving on foot, in overloaded bush taxis, and on the backs of donkey carts. An entire nation mobilizing to protect its chosen leader. The American soldiers found themselves in an impossible position, trained for combat, but facing an enemy that fought with courage instead of weapons. Sergeant Williams, a 23-year-old from Detroit, stared at a young boy who couldn't be older than his little brother back home. The child held a small Burkina Faso flag in one hand and a wilted flower in the other, offering both to the bewildered soldier with an innocent smile. Around them, the crowd began to sing the national anthem, their voices harmonizing in Moor, French, and Diola, creating a sound more powerful than any weapon. The tactical advantage that superior firepower should have provided seemed meaningless against people willing to die, standing than live kneeling. Radio chatter from command grew increasingly frantic as news of the standoff spread across social media platforms worldwide. Williams looked into the boy's trusting eyes and wondered how he would explain this moment to his own children someday, assuming he survived whatever came next. Deep within the palace's inner chambers, Traoré knelt on a traditional woven mat before a small altar adorned with cowrie shells and burning frankincense. The ancient room, hidden from modern renovations, still bore the original mud brick walls that had sheltered mossy kings for centuries before colonial conquest. Elder Yamba, the palace's oldest advisor, entered silently, carrying a leather pouch filled with sacred objects passed down through generations of resistance leaders. His weathered hands trembled, not with age, but with the gravity of the moment, as he placed a small wooden mask on the altar. The mask's carved features seemed to come alive in the flickering candlelight, its hollow eyes reflecting the wisdom of ancestors who had faced similar impossible choices. Outside, the sound of his people's voices drifted through the thick walls like prayers carried on desert winds. The sweet smoke of incense mixed with the earthy smell of red clay, creating an atmosphere that transported Traoré beyond the immediate crisis. Your great-grandfather fought the French with nothing but determination and the blessing of his ancestors, Elder Yamba whispered in Moor, his voice barely audible above the distant chanting. The old man's fingers traced patterns in the dust on the floor, drawing symbols that predated written history and carried the collective memory of his people. Traoré closed his eyes and felt the weight of generations settling on his shoulders like a familiar but heavy blanket. In his mind, he could see Thomas Sankara's defiant smile, hear Patrice Lumumba's passionate speeches, and feel the righteous anger of every African leader who had refused to bow to foreign pressure. The wooden mask seemed to pulse with an inner light as Elder Yamba began to chant in the ancient tongue of the Mossy warriors. The walls themselves appeared to lean inward as if the palace were embracing its current occupant and whispering secrets of survival. Time seemed to slow as Traoré felt his individual fear dissolving into something larger and more powerful than himself. A sudden gust of wind rattled the shutters despite the morning stillness, carrying with it the scent of baobab flowers and distant rain. Elder Yamba's eyes widened as he recognized the sign, his voice rising in excitement as he interpreted the ancestral message. They are telling you that true power comes not from weapons or foreign approval, but from the unbreakable bond between a leader and his people, he translated urgently. Traoré opened his eyes to find the candles burning brighter, their flames dancing in a pattern that defied the physics of the closed room. The sounds from outside had changed, too. What had been panicked shouting now sounded like a celebration, as if the crowd could sense their leader's spiritual awakening. Through the small window, a single bird landed on the sill and sang 3 clear notes before flying toward the rising sun. The sign was unmistakable to anyone raised in the traditions of the land. The ancestors had chosen their champion. Rising from the mat with newfound clarity, Traoré felt the fear drain from his body like water from broken pottery. The wooden mask caught the morning light streaming through the window, its ancient features now appearing to smile with approval. Elder Yamba pressed a small amulet into the president's palm, a piece of meteorite wrapped in gold thread that had protected Mossy kings for over 500 years. Your response must echo through history like the great speeches of our liberation heroes, the elder counseled, his voice gaining strength with each word. Traoré nodded, understanding that this moment would define not just his presidency, but the future of African sovereignty itself. The weight of the amulet in his palm felt like holding a piece of falling star, a reminder that even the heavens had a stake in this confrontation. As he prepared to face the American forces, he carried with him the accumulated wisdom of every ancestor who had ever refused to surrender their dignity to foreign power. President Traoré emerged from the palace's main entrance with the measured stride of a man who had found his purpose in the wisdom of ages. The crowd's roar intensified as their leader appeared, but he raised his hand for silence, and 10,000 voices stilled as if commanded by nature itself. In his left hand, he carried a simple wooden staff carved from baobab wood, while his right held a microphone connected to speakers that would carry his words across the continent. His traditional white bubu gleamed in the morning sun, a stark contrast to the military fatigues surrounding the compound's perimeter. Captain Rodriguez adjusted his binoculars, expecting to see fear or defiance in the president's eyes, but finding instead an unsettling calm that made his trigger finger twitch nervously. The ancestral amulet in Traoré's pocket seemed to pulse with warmth against his hip, reminding him that he stood not alone, but with generations of warriors. Elder Yamba watched from the palace steps, his weathered face breaking into a knowing smile as he recognized the ancient power flowing through his president. Captain Rodriguez. Traoré's voice boomed across the compound, somehow knowing the American commander's name despite never having met him.